Azazello thrust his clawed hand into the stove, pulled out a smoking brand, and set fire to the tablecloth. Then he set fire to the stack of old newspapers on the sofa, and next to the manuscripts and the window curtain. The master, already drunk with the impending ride, flung some book from the shelf onto the table, ruffled its pages in the flame of the tablecloth, and the book blazed up merrily. Burn, burn, former life. Burn, suffering, cried Margarita. The room was already swaying in crimson pillars, and along with the smoke the three ran out of the door, went up the stone steps, and came to the yard. The first thing they saw there was the landlord's cook sitting on the ground. Beside her lay spilled potatoes and several bunches of onions. The cook's state was comprehensible. 3 black steeds snorted by the shed, twitching, sending up fountains of earth. Margarita mounted first, then Azazello, and last the master. The cook moaned and wanted to raise her hand to make the sign of the cross, but Azazello shouted menacingly from the saddle. "I'll cut your hand off." He whistled, and the steeds, breaking through the linden branches, soared up and pierced the low black cloud. Smoke poured at once from the basement window. From below came the weak, pitiful cry of the cook. "We're on fire." The steeds were already racing over the rooftops of Moscow. "I want to bid farewell to the city," the master cried to Azazello, who rode at their head. Thunder ate up the end of the master's phrase. Azazello nodded and sent his horse into a gallop. The dark cloud flew precipitously to meet the flyers, but as yet gave not a sprinkle of rain. They flew over the boulevards, they saw little figures of people scatter, running for shelter from the rain. The first drops were falling. They flew over Smoke, all that remained of Gribodov House. They flew over the city which was already being flooded by darkness. Over them lightning flashed. Soon the roofs gave place to greenery. Only then did the rain pour down, transforming the flyers into 3 huge bubbles in the water. Margarita was already familiar with the sensation of flight, but the master was not, and he marveled at how quickly they reached their goal, the one to whom he wished to bid farewell, because he had no one else to bid farewell to. He immediately recognized through the veil of rain the building of Stravinsky's clinic, the river, and the pine woods on the other bank, which he had studied so well. They came down in the clearing of a copse not far from the clinic. "I'll wait for you here," cried Azazello, his hands to his mouth, now lit up by lightning, now disappearing behind the gray veil. "Say your farewells, but be quick." The Master and Margarita jumped from their saddles and flew, flickering like watery shadows, through the clinic garden. A moment later the Master, with an accustomed hand, was pushing aside the balcony grill of room number 117. Margarita followed after him. They stepped into Ivanushka's room, unseen and unnoticed in the rumbling and howling of the storm. The Master stopped by the bed. Ivanushka lay motionless, as before, when for the first time he had watched a storm in the house of his repose. But he was not weeping as he had been then. Once he had taken a good look at the dark silhouette that burst into his room from the balcony, he raised himself, held out his hands, and said joyfully, "Ah, it's you. And I kept waiting and waiting for you. And here you are, my neighbor." To this the Master replied, "I'm here, but unfortunately I cannot be your neighbor any longer. I'm flying away forever, and I've come to you only to say farewell." "I knew that, I guessed it," Ivan replied quietly and asked, "You met him?" "Yes," said the Master. "I've come to say farewell to you, because you are the only person I've talked with lately." Ivanushka brightened up and said, "It's good that you stopped off here. I'll keep my word, I won't write any more poems. I'm interested in something else now." Ivanushka smiled and with mad eyes looked somewhere past the Master. "I want to write something else." "You know, while I lay here, a lot became clear to me." The Master was excited by these words and, sitting on the edge of Ivanushka's bed, said, "Ah, but that's good, that's good. You'll write a sequel about him." Ivanushka's eyes lit up. "But won't you do that yourself?" Here he hung his head and added pensively, "Ah, yes, what am I asking?" Ivanushka looked sidelong at the floor, his eyes fearful. "Yes," said the Master, and his voice seemed unfamiliar and hollow to Ivanushka, "I won't write about him any more now. I'll be occupied with other things." A distant whistle cut through the noise of the storm. "Do you hear?" asked the Master,